Born into slavery in colonial New York, Elizabeth Freeman was never meant to leave a mark on history. Poor, illiterate, and enslaved, she was ignored by men who demanded liberty for themselves while refusing it to her. And yet, she did the unthinkable. She sued her so-called master for her freedom. But how could a woman who could neither read nor write win such a case? And how did her fight shake the foundations of a new nation? Elizabeth Freeman, later known as Mum Bet, was born into slavery in the mid-1740s, possibly in the spring of 1744. Her exact place of birth is uncertain, though some suggest it was in New York State, where she grew up on the plantation farm of Peter Hoggaboom at Claverack, in what is now Columbia County. Hoggaboom, as his surname suggests, was a member of a Dutch family that had come to reside in this part of America during the mid-17th century, when New York was known as New Amsterdam and was a Dutch colony. In her early years, she was known as Bet, which was almost certainly an abbreviation of Elizabeth. Based on what we know of the Hoggaboom farm, she grew up in a household where many were enslaved. Amongst them was her sister Lizzie. As was common for enslaved people in the 18th century, the identities of her parents are unknown, and it is unclear if they remained on the same estate. Unfortunately, Bet never learned to read or write, and the early years of her life remained shrouded in silence, as she left behind no written accounts. Instead, what we know of her story emerges only later, after she forced her way into the public eye and captured the attention of an entire state through a bold and unprecedented legal battle. And, as we will soon see, that battle would change everything. In the early 1750s, Peter Hoggaboom's daughter Hannah married Colonel John Ashley, a prominent figure in the town of Sheffield in Massachusetts. Bet was sent to live with Hannah as a household slave in Sheffield, possibly only being 7 or 8 years old at the time. Fortunately, we can still see the world she lived in for nearly 3 decades, because the house of Colonel John Ashley, built in 1735, still stands today and is now a museum. As a 2.5-story house, it has many rooms and would have been considered a very large country house by the standards of the mid-18th century. Bet's life here would have focused on keeping the house clean, washing clothes and carrying out arduous manual labour, which took up greater amounts of time in an age before washing machines, tumble dryers, hoovers and other machines. In the Ashley household, Bet soon established herself as a woman who was not intimidated by her enslavers. Later accounts describe Hannah Ashley as harsh, and one famous story claims that she grabbed a heated shovel to strike Bet's sister Lizzie with. She too had been sent to live in the Ashley household, but before she could hit Lizzie, Bet stepped in and blocked her blows. Hannah inflicted a deep wound on her that left a sizable scar, but rather than covering it up, Bet displayed it openly thereafter, a way of saying to visitors to the house that Mrs. Ashley was cruel to her slaves. During these years, Bet also became a mother. The identity of her child's father remains uncertain, but tradition holds that he left to serve in the American Revolutionary War and never returned. While men marched to fight for liberty, Bet remained in bondage, raising a child in a world that denied her even the most basic claim to freedom. But in Sheffield, words were being written that would soon make that contradiction impossible to ignore. Elizabeth lived through an era of great change in North America while she lived at the Ashley household. As she grew up here, she would have heard constant talks of the long war with the French that raged across North America from 1754 to 1763. This conflict ended with Britain seizing control of what was then called New France, territory we know now as Canada, while Massachusetts remained under British rule. She would have also heard the growing anger voiced by John Ashley and the guests who gathered in his home, as they complained about the rising taxes imposed by the British Crown on Massachusetts and the other 12 colonies stretching from New Hampshire to Georgia. In January 1773, when she was probably nearing her 30th year, she would have also seen a large group of Massachusetts landholders gather at the Ashley house in Sheffield to draft what became known as the Sheffield Declaration. It protested against a growing British tyranny in the colonies and stated, quote, "Mankind in a state of nature are equal, free, and independent of each other, and have a right to the undisturbed enjoyment of their lives, their liberty, and property." Thomas Jefferson would paraphrase these words when he wrote the Declaration of Independence 3 years later. In a significant development, it appears that Theodore Sedgwick, a young lawyer, drafted most of the Sheffield Declaration during the meeting at the Ashley House. He will feature again in Elizabeth's story before long. For Bet, if she heard anything about the Sheffield Declaration that was drafted in the Ashley House in January 1773, she could not have missed the irony. Men who claimed that all were entitled to liberty and natural rights wrote those soaring phrases while keeping her in chains beneath the same roof. The language of freedom echoed through the halls, but it did not include her. Not yet. But in the coming years, she would decide to test whether those words meant anything at all. The Sheffield Declaration was a major event in the lead up to the American Revolutionary War. The Boston Tea Party took place on the other side of Massachusetts in December 1773. This was followed by a deteriorating political situation, which led to the outbreak of war in the spring of 1775. The Second Continental Congress issued Jefferson's Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia in the summer of 1776, and a bitter war followed with Britain, one which was won by 1781, and ended in Britain acknowledging the independence of the United States of America in 1783. As part of the creation of a new federal state, Massachusetts drew up its own state constitution in 1780. In it was included the following passage, which echoed both the Sheffield Declaration and the Declaration of Independence. All men are born free and equal, and have certain natural, essential, and unalienable rights, among which may be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties, that of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, in fine, that of seeking and obtaining their safety and happiness. All of it was building toward a reckoning. Elizabeth would soon turn these lofty promises into a weapon, confronting her enslaver, and demanding the freedom she'd been denied her entire life. In 1781, aware of the wording of the Massachusetts Constitution, Bet sought to petition her freedom based on the idea that the Constitution essentially forbade slavery in the state. According to a later account, she said to Theodore Sedgwick, the lawyer who had drafted the Sheffield Declaration back in 1773, "I heard that paper read yesterday that says all men are created equal, and that every man has a right to freedom. I'm not a dumb critter. Won't the law give me my freedom?" Sedgwick's legacy in the abolitionist movement is mixed, but he did believe that slavery was incompatible with the principles of the new Massachusetts Constitution, and he agreed to take the case. It wasn't long until he submitted the paperwork on behalf of Bet and another enslaved man in the Ashley household, Brom, who it said was added to the case to strengthen it, as women had limited legal rights at the time. Hence, in 1871, Brom and Bet versus Ashley was launched as a legal case, in the hopes of obtaining their freedom. It would have a huge bearing on Massachusetts law. Proceedings on Brom and Bet versus Ashley began in the County Court of Common Pleas in the town of Great Barrington in August 1781. Sedgwick's co-counsel for the case was Tapping Reeve, founder of the Litchfield Law School in Connecticut, one of the earliest law schools in America. Together, they were considered two of the most formidable lawyers in Massachusetts. They argued that the wording of the new Massachusetts state constitution effectively rendered the institution of slavery illegal in the state, and that Brom and Bet had to be set free. John Ashley responded that the pair were not slaves, but instead household servants with nowhere else to go, a common argument in cases of this kind in the late 18th century. The court ruled in favour of Brom and Bet, and not only ordered Ashley to release them from bondage, but also to pay them compensation for their years of free labour. And so Bet had done the unthinkable. She had won. In that moment, she became the first African-American woman to secure her freedom under the Massachusetts Constitution, turning its promise of equality into a living, undeniable fact. After she and Brom won their freedom, they were offered paid positions working in the Ashley House. This was a very common situation for many freed slaves in America in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and a great proportion simply swapped being a slave for being a household servant with a small wage. However, Bet turned the offer down, and instead went to work for Theodore Sedgwick. She would spend over a quarter of a century in Sedgwick's household, and became a close member of the family, acting as a nanny of Theodore and his wife Pamela's children. It was at this time that the name Mum Bet stuck to her, though after winning her freedom in the 1781 court case, she adopted the surname Freeman, hence becoming known forevermore as Elizabeth Freeman. The use of the name Mum Bet by the Sedgwick children gives a clear idea of how integral a part of the family she became. It is from Catherine Sedgwick, one of Theodore's daughters, who later became a well-known author, that we have received our most detailed accounts of Mum Bet's life. In 1853, when she was an old woman herself, Catherine wrote a book entitled Slavery in New England, which was published in Bentley's Miscellany. Although it cast the institution of slavery in Massachusetts and other northern states in a mild light, it is a very valuable source for Bet's life and how she won her freedom. While Bet was beginning a new life as a free woman within the Sedgwick household, Massachusetts law was being impacted by her actions. Her case, brought alongside Brom in 1781, was one of several early 1780s lawsuits arguing that slavery had become illegal under the new Massachusetts Constitution of 1780. The others were three separate court cases, collectively known as the Quock-Walker cases, though they all involved the same person, an enslaved man called Queku, or Quock Walker. As a result, it became clear, even to those who still hoped to preserve slavery in Massachusetts, that the institution was living on borrowed time. In 1783, just 2 years after Elizabeth's victory, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court declared slavery incompatible with the state constitution. And when the first federal census was taken in 1790, not a single enslaved person was listed in Massachusetts. Thus, Massachusetts became one of the first parts of the United States to become a free state, following the Vermont Republic, which, as an independent state in 1777, had abolished slavery upon its foundation, and Pennsylvania, which had abolished slavery in 1780. On the other hand, it would be well into the 19th century before some northern states like New York abolished slavery. So, with her victory, Elizabeth Freeman helped tip the balance of history, turning Massachusetts into one of the only places in the United States where slavery was driven into extinction in the 18th century. During the years that Elizabeth worked at the Sedgwick house, she had a second profession as a local healer, nurse, and midwife, and in the early 19th century, she eventually acquired enough money to buy her own house. By then, the Sedgwick children were grown up, and they no longer needed a nanny. Thus, she retired and moved into her own home on Cherry Hill in the town of Stockbridge. Her daughter, who by then had her own children, lived nearby, and Bet would spend her later years near to her grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She lived a long life, dying in Stockbridge in December 1829. Because we do not know her date of birth precisely, we cannot say exactly how old she was, but she was around 85 years of age at the time of her passing, and had spent more of her life as a free woman than as a slave. Reflecting on what liberty meant to her, she once declared, Any time while I was a slave, if 1 minute's freedom had been offered to me, and I had been told I must die at the end of that minute, I would have taken it. Just to stand 1 minute on God's earth a free woman, I would." She was laid to rest in the Sedgwick family plot in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, the only non-Sedgwick buried there, a testament to the place she had earned within the household that once helped her secure her freedom. The family marked her grave with an inscription that read, "Elizabeth Freeman, also known by the name of Mum Bet, died December 28, 1829. Her supposed age was 85. She was born a slave and remained a slave for nearly 30 years. She could neither read nor write, yet in her own sphere she had no superior or equal. She neither wasted time nor property. She never violated a trust, nor failed to perform a duty. In every situation of domestic trial, she was the most efficient helper and the tenderest friend. Good mother, farewell." Around the year 1812, one of Theodore's daughters-in-law, Susan Ridley Sedgwick, painted a delicate watercolour on ivory miniature of Bet when she was about 70 years old. Preserved today by the Massachusetts Historical Society, it is widely regarded as her only known surviving portrait. In the 2 centuries since her death, her story has become central to the history of abolition in the United States, a reminder that the promise of freedom was not merely written into law, but claimed by those bold enough to demand it. In August 2022, the Sheffield Historical Society unveiled a statue in her honour, recognising her role in the long march toward freedom. Often described as the Rosa Parks of her time, Elizabeth Freeman's courage did more than win her own liberty. It helped ignite a movement that would reshape the nation. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Elizabeth Freeman. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also let me know down below in the comments. And anyway, I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.